What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of the Auburn Express, powered by the War Report. We are here. It's game week, Auburn versus Missouri. And coming back to talk to us is my guy, Quentin Corpuel. I got your name right this time.
Yep.
Um, to talk a little bit about the Missouri Tigers as they face the Auburn Tigers here on homecoming week for Mizzou. Quentin, how's it going, man? How are you guys feeling in Como about this game coming up?
Well, it's been a great week in Columbia. Everybody's caught a case of the homecoming fever, which happens every year. Even though
The inventors of homecoming, right?
oh, it's tough to say in a current Mizzou building, but I don't think they did. A lot of other schools actually lay claim to being the first, and they have actual tangible claims of being the first. And even though Mizzou's may not be the first, I'd say it's certainly the finest. Everything
Okay.
leading up to homecoming, including the parade, the blood drive, which set records again this year. Competitions between student organizations. It's really exciting stuff, and it's another reason why I love going here.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that aside, Auburn is coming to town this weekend for the homecoming. Last time there was a homecoming game between these two, it ended in one of the most ridiculous fashions ever. Went in Auburn's favor that time. Missouri fans probably not as excited to relive that. But what are we expecting out of this edition of homecoming? Auburn versus Missouri, Tigers versus Tigers?
Well, I think it'll be a competitive game. I think it'll be a good game. Mizzou is currently favored by, I believe, 4 or 4.5. That
Right.
line was way down from what it was not too long ago. I believe Mizzou was a touchdown favorite, even as recently as a few days ago. And I think that's a more reasonable line. I think both of these teams, in some sense, have disappointed in the eyes of many people to
Yes.
varying degrees.
Right.
I think one thing I'll be looking out for, and we can get into specific keys a little bit later, in Mizzou's first test against a top four, probably SEC team in Texas A&M, they fell completely flat. They were dominated at the line of scrimmage. I mean, really pick any facet of the game, and Texas A&M was a superior team. That Vanderbilt win is looking better by the week.
Yeah.
However, I don't think Vanderbilt is going to be a top four SEC team, which is
Yeah.
where Mizzou, many of them expected Mizzou to be there, to
Right.
be amongst that top tier. And so, while I think Auburn has disappointed in the eyes of many, I still think they're a solid team. They just have a really hard time staying out of their own way, which I'm sure you all have talked about ad nauseum through this
Yeah.
first half of the season.
That is literally the talking point after every game, after every loss is, can you stop shooting yourself in the foot? There are not enough bullets in the gun. Please exhaust them all. Hopefully they've all been exhausted first half of the season for self-inflicted wounds, and you can just move forward into the portion of the season where other teams are beating you and you're not beating yourself. Um, but yeah, so let's talk about, a little bit about really the struggles of Missouri and some of the things that they've done well this season. Let's start really with the offensive side of the football and kind of the dichotomy of this high-powered offense that's out there scoring a bunch of points, really capable quarterback with a good receiving core, um, but then not able to run the football particularly well against some of the better defensive fronts, and then seeming to be a little off at times between the connection between quarterback and receivers. What do you make of kind of what the kind of Jekyll and Hyde of the Missouri offense so far this season?
Yeah, I think when a lot of people, especially people that watch Mizzou very closely, when they're talking about this year's team, it is put in the context of 2023. And that's understandable because 2023 was a pantheon year for Mizzou football. They win 11 games. They're in that same category as 2007 and 2013, where they were this close to
Right.
being in the conversation for a national championship. And everything following was going to be, oh, here's how this compares to 2023. And I think sometimes that's a little unfair, but it's very understandable because they put a lot of things together on both sides of the ball in order to get to 11-2 and a Cotton Bowl win over a premier program in Ohio State. Um, in terms of the offense, I think the running game's been pretty good.
Hmm.
Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll have both been really great running outside zone. That was one of the reasons that Coach
Right.
Drinkwitz and the rest of Mizzou's staff recruited Nate Noel, is because he was not only familiar with running an outside zone scheme, but he was really effing good at it. And that has translated and then some to Mizzou. And then Marcus Carroll, more of a bigger body, more of a
Right.
power back, um, more of a thunder, and Nate Noel is the lightning, if you want to think about it that way. Marcus Carroll actually stepped in last week against UMass in wake of Nate Noel's back tightening up on the trip over, so he was held out. Marcus Carroll ran for 91 yards and 3 touchdowns, and I believe with just 15 carries. And so even though may not be as physically able to hit holes as hard, to be able to get to the second and third level as fast as Nate Noel, he's still effective running that outside zone. And that's also set up passing plays. There was a play earlier this season where Mizzou faked an outside zone to the left sideline. Luther Burden, one of the best players in the country, is just left alone streaking across the field. That's an easy touchdown. And so that's been a force multiplier for most of the season. Against Texas A&M, that was taken away because Mizzou
Right.
found themselves down by a lot really early. And that's never really a situation you want to get in if you're any team, even if you have a really strong passing offense, because that makes the defense's job a lot easier if you're in obvious passing situations very early. And so that plus Brady Cook hasn't looked the same this year. I'm not going to speculate if anything's going on because we don't know anything, and speculating is bad journalism. And so they've been trying. It's just that Brady Cook has not looked like his 2023 self. Again, this goes back to comparing everything to 2023. Brady Cook looked like a plus quarterback. Looked like somebody you can win because of, and not just win in spite of. He was fully healthy, had a great group of receivers, had a great offensive line, had a great play caller, and that fueled a lot of the success. Even though most of that support system is still in place, he has not been as productive, especially in some regard, like throwing deep down the field. Not been nearly as productive as throwing deep down the field. That's been a major talking point for pretty much this entire first half of the season. They've hit on some, but not really all to where they've consistently taken the lid off of defenses. So whether that'll happen or not, most of us aren't really sure, or if they're just going to embrace being efficient and lacking explosion like some other teams. Like I had mentioned the Kansas City Chiefs, to where the early Mahomes years, you saw a lot of deep crossers, a lot of vertical routes, a lot of air yards. As defenses try to counteract that with more defensive backs, stuff like too high, which contrary to
Right.
some people is not ruining the NFL. It's just
That's such a
reaction
ridiculous
to,
statement, but yeah.
yeah, no, it's just reactionary. I mean, the sport moves in waves. People react to other people, and that's just how it goes. And once that happened, they started cutting 1,000 paper cuts instead of trying to deal big blows over the air. And is Mizzou going to be that? Maybe. I'm just still wondering if that's ever going to happen because that's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, so listen, you mentioned the Texas A&M game specifically, and just kind of the struggles with the really at the offensive line of really being able to make the run game happen early in that game, and they got some tough breaks. Let's be clear, like they got put in the hole by a couple of bad calls, and it just kind of snowballed right there from them for them after that. But it was a team that just did not seem to respond to the adversity very well, and so it's a question I really have specifically offensively. Do you? I mean, UMass is not a game that you can use to determine whether or not a team is able to do that response. But do you feel like, based upon what you've seen from this team this season, specifically offensively right now, that they're able to respond if they get hit early with some adversity?
Yeah, they can. They did in the Boston College game. They went down 14-3. Defense made a few big plays, and the offense was able to continue that momentum by scoring touchdowns off of those turnovers. So they've already done it this season against Vanderbilt to a lesser degree. That game was competitive throughout. In overtime, when they needed to score, Cook to Burden, first play, great route, great throw, touchdown. So they've been able to do that this season. That was, again, a trait of last season. They were able to come back after being punched in the mouth, whether it was Kentucky, whether it was Florida, whether it was Ohio State, where it felt like that game might end 6-3. They were able to make plays when it mattered, and they've shown that ability this season. It's just the Texas A&M game, as you said, they were not able to respond.
Yeah,
They were not able.
I was
to.
actually surprised, man, when we previewed that game, which we preview all the SEC games.
Mhm.
I was shocked that Missouri would like. I thought it was going to be a competitive game, and it was absolutely not. Like it was a runaway victory for Texas A&M, and you couldn't have paid me to believe that was how that game was going to turn out.
Absolutely, and even though Texas A&M was favored, a lot of people picked Mizzou to win. And picked Mizzou to win. Some people by a couple of touchdowns if they were feeling confident, just because Texas A&M up until that point, past couple of years, they had been ranked high even to start the season. They fell flat and they
Right.
fell short of people's expectations. But I think when you eliminate the number next to the name and just saw instead of number 9 Missouri at number 25 Texas A&M, you just saw Missouri and Texas A&M. I think that's a bias that a lot of people struggle getting over,
Yeah.
and Texas A&M was the physically more dominant team, and that's why you saw Brady Cook running for his life. A
Yeah.
lot, a lot of his dropbacks. That's why the run game couldn't work early on, is because Mizzou was getting overwhelmed at the line of scrimmage. Granted, by a very good Texas A&M defensive line that has multiple players that are probably going to be playing on Sundays.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so, especially with Auburn's front seven being at, I still think it's a pretty good front seven. I'm curious to see how they respond to the next best defensive line and linebacking core they'll face, other than Texas A&M so far this season.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup. Well, we know that Missouri has performed decently on the offensive side for the majority of the. Take Texas A&M out; they've performed pretty well. But if you are in need of some boost to your performance, then maybe you want to go over to tryjoymode.com. They are the sponsor of today's Auburn Express. Go to tryjoymode.com. Use code REPORT, get you 20% off plus free shipping when you go over there, and it helps to boost your performance, whether it's cardiovascular performance or maybe you have some erection support that you need. Joy Mode is the place to go. Try joymode.com, 20% off plus free shipping. That lets them know the guys over here at the War Report sent you. We are here inside the Auburn Express talking to our guy Quentin about Missouri and all of the things involving Missouri. We're going to shift it over and talk a little bit about the Missouri defense. And, this is a defensive unit that, listen, I will be honest. This was where I questioned Missouri this year. Are they going to be as good defensively as they were last year? Started out again the season, one of the top rated defenses in the country. It seemed like, hey, everything is rolling. And still, I think a good defensive unit. How do you rate so far what's happened with that defensive unit for Missouri this season?
There have been ups and downs. I think one of the biggest questions came in the secondary with the losses of Chris Abrams-Drain and Ennis Rakestraw, plus Jalen Carr last to the NFL. All three of those guys had been with Mizzou for a very long time, and they were linchpins of success last season. And the guys stepping up to those roles definitely had the pedigree, and some of them, like Drayden Norwood, had proved in a Mizzou uniform that they could do it, that they could step into those bigger roles. It's been up and down with the secondary so far this season. Toriano Pride Jr., who was originally the cornerback too, has seen his reps dwindle over the past couple of weeks in favor of Nick DeLoach, a younger guy that many Mizzou players and coaches have been very high on throughout fall camp. Definitely a freak athlete is the term I've heard a couple of times to describe him. But the CB2 spot has been a little inconsistent, especially as Pride's performance early on. Yes, he had that pick six against Murray State. That was great. Other than that, he's been beaten a lot. He was beaten for a touchdown early against Vanderbilt by a freshman hadn't had a collegiate touch before that touchdown. He got beat pretty badly there. And even Drayden Norwood's been beat badly at least a couple of times. And that just didn't really happen last year. That was never really something Mizzou had to worry about. So I think that unit's growth is going to be very important, especially as they're going to face offenses like after Auburn, like even Auburn, got a great receiving core. I think there could definitely be struggles down the line with guys like Cam Coleman and Keandre Lambert Smith. Those are very good receivers. And so I think that's going to be an interesting matchup to watch. And then next week you play Alabama, whose offense has been one of the most explosive in the country, with a guy like Ryan Williams, who's been one of the best receivers in the country at 11 years old. And so they're going to be playing teams that have good receivers and that have capable quarterbacks. It's just, are they up to the challenge, and can they improve over this second half of the season?
Yeah, that's going to be. I think the big matchup that I'm going to be looking at is the Missouri defensive line. How disruptive can they be to what Auburn wants to do, specifically in the run game? Because that is that's. I'll give credit to Texas A&M and the balance in which they attacked, but being able to run the football is really how Texas A&M was able to dominate that football game. They were able to run the ball effectively. is Missouri ready to be able to absorb what Auburn has from a rushing attack? Though it's not the most highly rated, it still has one of the best running backs in the SEC in Jarquez Hunter. And is Missouri ready to be able to do that? What do you think about that Missouri defensive front being able to stop the run in this game?
Yeah, I find it hard to believe it's going to be something like the 2013 SEC championship game when Nick Marshall and Trey Mason were doing literally whatever they wanted the entire game. I
Right.
think that's going to be a historical outlier forever. But at the same time, I do worry a little bit because I'm having a really difficult time getting the Texas A&M game out of my head. That defensive line, they were pushed out of their gaps. They
Yeah.
really struggled maintaining gap integrity, and that's a trait of all great defensive lines at all levels of football is that they're able to plug gaps, that they're able to basically stonewall running backs and scrambling quarterbacks at the line of scrimmage. When you looked at even when Connor Weidman dropped back and scrambled, he was running through holes that were so wide.
Right.
And a lot of that, Corey Flagg Jr., one of the linebackers at Mizzou, was saying after the game that he think guys were trying to make plays instead of staying within the defense. And when that happens, a lot of the time you get pushed out of your gaps and you give up chunk gains on the ground. You saw that for the first play of the second half. Talk about failing to respond is a 75-yard rushing touchdown by Le'Veon Moss right
Right.
up the middle.
That
Um,
I'm gonna I when they came out from the half, I was like, okay, Missouri's gonna get in here and they're gonna punch back a little bit and they're gonna make this
mhm.
interesting. And then literally first play, I was like, yo, what is
Yeah.
happening right now? This is
Yep.
crazy.
Yep, that is a tough one to come back from because that is when you want to start resetting the tone. Instead, it goes the complete opposite direction. And
Right.
so I think they can do it. They have guys on that defensive line like Christian Williams in the middle that have proven to be able to plug those gaps before. Johnny Walker Jr. off the edge. They were dealt. The front seven was a big blow. During UMass, Coach Drinkwitz announced yesterday that linebacker Khalil Jacobs and edge rusher Joe Moore would miss the rest of the season because of injury.
Hmm.
And those are two pretty big losses. I would argue that Khalil Jacobs had looked the best of any linebacker so far that Mizzou has had this year. He had had a couple of years of experience at South Alabama under defensive coordinator Corey Batoon, and especially when Mizzou would sub in an extra defensive back on obvious passing downs, Khalil Jacobs was the one linebacker that was still on the field because he's so good at going sideline to sideline and getting downhill. He was asked to do that a lot at South Alabama. He was being asked to do that a lot at Mizzou, and he was doing it really well. Now they're without that. Plus Joe Moore, who, while he wasn't a main part of the defensive end rotation, he was still pretty important, even with not as many snaps as other guys. So they have guys to supplement those snaps, specifically on the end. I'm looking at Williams Nwaneri, the highly touted recruit at Elise Summit in Kansas City. Um, he's going to get more reps. He got more reps last week against UMass, even got a sack. So I think his growth suddenly becomes a lot more important with a man down in the defensive end room. And then with the linebackers, Corey Flagg Jr., speaking of him, he had a huge interception at the end of the half last week. That was basically a 10-point swing. UMass was threatening to score. Flagg takes an interception 80 yards. Mizzou ends up kicking a field goal. And so this is a very opportunistic defense, even if they've had more holes than last year.
Right.
Thankfully, as we talked a little bit about before, Auburn has turned it over a lot.
Has given a lot of opportunities.
Yep. A lot of opportunities given to the defense. So I think if they're able to win the turnover battle, which I think there's a very good chance they are, especially because Mizzou has done a great job of taking care of the ball themselves on offense, albeit some, again, struggles over the air. I think if they can win the turnover battle, that's going to be super key.
Okay, well, that pivots into what we want to talk about lastly before I let you get out of here. We're talking to Quentin Corpuel here from Rock M Nation, talking about the Missouri versus Auburn matchup this weekend. Two final questions. Missouri wins if. Fill in that blank right there. And I know the obvious answer, they score more points, but like what's going to be the thing that you're going to look at and say, hey, all right, they went if they're able to do this. Maybe it's the turnover margin that you talked about. Like, is there a thing, and it can be multiple things that you feel like Missouri wins this game if these things happen?
I think Missouri wins if they're able to establish the run. And Coach Drinkwitz has talked about, oh, we don't want to establish the run or establish the pass. We want to establish scoring points, however that is. And
Right.
I agree with that. However, in the games where they have been able to establish the run, which is basically every single one except Texas A&M, they have found a lot of success on offense, and that's made things a lot easier on Brady Cook and the aerial attack. If they can't do that, then it's going to shoulder a lot of responsibility on an aspect of the game that's struggled comparatively to expectation this year. And so I think if Nate Noel, who should probably play this week, if Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll and that offensive line are able to generate chunk gains on the ground like they have a lot of times this year, I think Mizzou's going to be in a really, really good spot offensively.
Okay. All right. Well, let's turn it the other direction. Missouri loses this game. If what? Is it just going to be the inverse if they're not able to establish the run? But like, what's the big thing that you're looking at? And when you look at the stat sheet at the end of the game, you're going to be like, yep, we can circle that right there.
Yeah, well, the thing about that is a boring answer, and I don't want to bore your listeners. So I'm going to go in another direction. I think if Mizzou loses the turnover battle,
Okay.
I think they lose the game. It's become that hasn't been too common. Again, Auburn, I believe, 15 total takeaways. That's a bottom 5 number in the country. But outside of the turnovers, they haven't been bad. And their games have been very close outside of a few possessions, which are decided by, you guessed it, turnovers,
Right.
such as Oklahoma,
Right.
Cal, um,
Arkansas.
Arkansas. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think if a few plays go Auburn's way, they could easily be 5-1 if they don't commit some of those turnovers. And
You're not
so,
wrong. As a person who
yeah,
watched every down of every one of those games, you are not wrong.
yeah. And so I think if Auburn is able to turn Mizzou over and Mizzou can't generate it themselves on the other end, I think Auburn is going to be in a really good spot.
All right. All right. Well, you heard it right here. That is going to be what we're going to be looking at when we're looking at this game. Is Auburn able to take care of the football and maybe generate some turnovers? Is Missouri able to establish the run game that allows, and really, I mean, again, I hear what the coach is saying, but it's absolutely the engine of what Missouri does. If you get the outside zone running the way that it's supposed to, it sets everything else up for that offense to be able to do the things that it needs to do. We will see that question. Both of those questions will be answered here very shortly. Before we get out of here, Quentin, tell the people how they can keep up with what you've got going on at Rock M Nation.
Yeah, absolutely. So my social media handles on Twitter and Instagram is just my name with no spaces, QUENTINCORPUEL. You can find me at rockmnation.com. You should also go check out our premium service, Rock M Plus. We got message boards. We're active on the football, basketball, and Olympic sports side. I don't think other Mizzou sites do Olympic sports like we do. We've got coverage of volleyball right now. We got off-season softball coverage, gymnastics, track and field, you name it, we're covering it. And so if you want to go check out some awesome premium content, I highly suggest Rock M Plus.
All right. Well, I appreciate it once again. We'll definitely be back when we start talking a little basketball. Basketball media days happen this week, so we're in full swing of basketball season now around here. Volleyball's going on. A lot of great things going on all around the conference, and we definitely should have more conversations about some of that stuff because now I actually have somebody who knows what they're talking about when we're